On this episode of Real Wins, we welcomed Authentic Co-Founder Bryant Hughes to the show. We discussed what developers and operators should look for when vetting a creative agency partner. We chatted about what information to have at the ready, what to watch out for, and some tips on how to vet for the best possible partnerships. This was a lot of fun, so let's dive right in. All right, guys, welcome back to Real Wins. Mike, thanks for joining me today. Bryant, thanks for joining me today. Special guest today.
Here we go. Love it.
Had to bring in the special guest for such a topic today, which we'll get to in a minute. Mike, how was your weekend? I heard that you went to a fun new play place, not quite a play place, but an adventure nonetheless for your kids.
Yeah, it's a new place. I think it started in Chicago. It's called the Wonder Museum, and they have this really cool immersive art exhibit that is very cool. The kids loved it. So it's like, you jump on things, you touch things, and they sort of react and create art, and you hear things. It's actually pretty wild. I think it's for kids and adults at all ages. It's some really, really cool stuff. So I had a blast with the kids here, with the kids over the weekend. I will say my morning with the kids wasn't so good, if you want to get into that.
Let's save that for the after hours podcast. A little birdie told me that, Bryant, you had a kidless weekend. So a very different experience for you. Are you feeling rested and rejuvenated?
Yeah. I mean, it's been maybe like 5+ years since I've had a weekend to myself. And so I had one and it was great. But by the end of it, I was itching for my kids and wife to come home. So, I don't know if I'm going to be doing that again anytime soon. So got to enjoy it while it lasted.
Yep. Yeah. I had a split weekend. We had like a snow day on Saturday, and then it was like a melty 50 degrees on Sunday. So, can't complain. A little bit of that Colorado action. But let's jump in. So this is a little bit of a different question today. I think we're going to be able to unpack a lot with it. And it really has to do with how to onboard a project, how to sort of look for and critique a good agency partnership. And I think this is something that we get often, comes into our inboxes in one way or another. Bryant, I know for me and you, it's a big one. But it really has to do with how do you vet a creative partner? How do you vet a multifamily agency partner? So I think, Mike, what you were thinking today is maybe you're going to turn the tables on us and do a little bit of a 180. Is that right?
Yeah, I would love to, because as we've talked about in the past, we work with a number of creative agencies, marketing agencies from our position as a manager of property and really establishing go-to-market plans for new developments. We've had the opportunity, privilege to work with a number of agencies, and the not so good of working with agencies. So I'd love to hear from you guys, being the agency, what is the best way that you think, or learn more about the best way you think for whether it's a developer, manager, operator, to work with you guys to establish a fantastic marketing program from the creative end to the marketing services side. How do you guys see that rolling out such that you can create a great partnership and produce amazing work?
Yeah, I'll get us kicked off here, Brian. I know that you have a ton of great thoughts about this because you handle so much of the organization around how it flows with Authentic. I will say that it's changed for us over the years, and I think we could get into like what those calls are, kind of what the nomenclature is for Authentic at this point. But I'll start off by saying I think the number one rule of thumb is you want to work with an agency partner that almost annoyingly so asks you a ton of questions about your project, be it on the creative side, the unit mix, kind of what the big vision plans are, all the way down to the nitty-gritty details of amenities and so forth, literally on that first call, because I think that's so important. But let me pause there. Bryant, you do a really great job setting context. So why don't you jump in and get us started?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how to approach an agency to kind of get the process started, I would say first and foremost, just like be very thorough with the information that you're sending over. I would say more often than not, we have like a project introduction form on our website that has 5 to 7 fairly basic questions of a project. And more often than not, we're getting 1 or 2 word responses for each of those questions, which makes it a little bit difficult for an agency to really understand like the scope and breadth of a project. That is sometimes okay if the work that we're doing is super limited, or if, a different type of agency who's doing a very limited amount of deliverables, that may be okay, that sort of limited information. But when you're working on a project and you're looking for an agency that's doing comprehensive work, that's doing work all the way from branding to the lease up marketing, we really need to know as much information about the project as possible so that we can custom tailor an approach based on the specific nuances and constraints of that individual project. Our approach is going to change depending on some of those constraints and nuances. So we really just need to make sure that we're working within them and that we're able to deliver as much value as possible, based on the needs of any particular project.
So coming from a guy who loves to put, one or two words into contact forms online, what is the process for you look like? Presumably you schedule a call with them, some sort of, I don't know, discovery call or other call to learn about the project. If I'm calling you guys, if I'm setting up, if I'm reaching out, I'm filling out a form with one word answers, I'm probably expecting a, call from you guys or an email from you guys saying, hey, let's have a longer conversation. So going into that conversation, what can I do in that position, or what can developers and other owners, operators do to be prepared for that call to really help you guys be able to create the best package, best proposal for the client?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the good news is that if we are getting those one-word responses, the first thing that we're going to do is want to hop into what we would call a discovery call to kind of ask some of those preliminary questions and get all those answers. So in terms of some of that information, this isn't an exhaustive list, but the size of the project, the type of the project, the market that you're working within, who are the different renters that you're going to be interacting with, or in the case of a condo sell through, again, like who are those different potential buyers that you're going to be dealing with. Also very helpful to know where the project is from a construction standpoint. Did construction already start? Are you targeting a construction start date? And then obviously, depending on the size of the project, how long will the project be in construction for, and what's going to be the TCO date? We base a lot of our work based on that TCO date. That's kind of how we determine when pre-leasing should start, when formal leasing should start. So all of that information just really helps us, again, tailor the specific approach that we're going to have to a project. And all that information is super relevant towards this initial discovery call.
Yeah, and so going into that type of call, I actually have two follow-up questions. One is how early or how late do you like to sort of really be able to get involved with the project? That's the first part. The second part is how much of those questions, obviously timeline is sort of a simple one that people know the answers for, but how many of the other questions, or how much of the other questions do you expect developers to come in with a fully formulated answer of, like, who's the target market, let's say, or things like that, versus you working with them as we go through the process to really establish that and work on that side of the strategic process or creative branding, whatever it might be?
Do you want to take that one, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take the first part. I think from a timeline perspective, it's always usually a little too late. I think thankfully, maybe in the last 12 to 18 months, it's felt like, it's getting a little bit better. I think there are progressive companies out there that understand they need to start this marketing process earlier and earlier. That's not to say that we don't get those contact forms submitted where, the leasing's starting or they're opening in 2 months or 3 months and they've done no pre-leasing. So that's always a challenge in and of itself. But usually what I like to say is as early as possible, early and often, in a perfect world, if we're able to sit with you at the strategy table before shovels hit the ground, and then as soon as things are off to the races, we're building your vision, your name, your brand, your identity, and kind of putting together those early on-site activations. That's the perfect world scenario. And that's what we would always recommend. So usually when we work with a partner the first time, they'll understand why. And so the next time around they come in, they bring us into those conversations, because I think especially the first time you're seeking a partner like that, you don't necessarily know that you need to be looking for that, or that you should be working with a firm that advocates for that. But I think time and time again, we see how important that is from a timeline perspective, so that your leasing really has great velocity heading into that TCO that Bryant was mentioning.
Totally. I mean, I 100% agree with you guys on that.
The reality is a lot of the times that the marketing budgets come out of a construction loan for a project. So usually we're starting to be engaged before the construction loan goes through, kind of earmarked into a project's budget. Sometimes that means we actually are starting the branding process before that goes through and before construction has actually started. And what that allows us to do is when construction is done, we can get signage on the property as quickly as possible. And why we really like to advocate for that is you really want as long of a time as possible during construction to have on-site branding and signage that's pointing people to a Splash website. We say a lot like, when should you get started? Well, as soon as possible. But the reason why we say that is because when you do have signage live on site that's directing people to a Splash website, those are just organic, non-paid for leads that are coming in through the website that are going to be, advocates for the project, and potential people that you can reach out to for potential condo sales or, future residents. And early on, maybe those people are more looky-loos and not necessarily people who are going to be pulling the trigger on signing a lease that early. But we can still use those emails to build remarketing lists, to build lookalike audiences. It just adds tremendous value to the project and helps you accelerate kind of leasing velocity sooner when leasing does formally start.
Awesome. I think to put a pin in that, I think one of the things we'll definitely all agree on is that start early is a one key takeaway, right? It's you have maximum opportunity to really drive the best results from a creative and marketing campaign. So that's sort of definitely one takeaway. As far as sort of diving into the beginning processes where you're really kind of starting to think about after you've learned the initial elements of what you need to learn about the project, the things you mentioned earlier, and diving into thinking about how we're starting to get to maybe the strategy or scope of services that you're thinking about that may work for this project. How do you work with a client to, tailor and tune a proposal of services for them that works for the specific project, the project economics, the project goals? What does that look like for you guys?
Thanks for listening to this episode of Real Wins. Brought to you by Authentic, delivering premier multifamily brand experiences and smart digital marketing. Authentic's proven approach accelerates leasing velocity, boosts rental rates, and increases long-term value. You can find out more at AuthenticFF.com. And by Charlesgate, the multifamily investor's secret weapon to help underwrite, go to market, and operate projects that generate market-beating returns. With an adaptive staffing model and on-demand leasing teams, Charlesgate empowers a better resident experience at an efficient cost structure for today's owners. Visit charlesgate.com for more. Yeah, I think to recap really quickly, so the two calls that we're talking about here are the discovery call and the consultative call. And I think if you're going to work with a new agency partner, creative partner, you want to make sure, again, that they're vetting out the project to the best of their abilities so that they understand what you're asking them to do as much as possible. And for us, to recap bullet points, discovery call is really a time for us to get to know you. You can get to know us. We talk about timelines. We talk about budgets. We ask those high-level questions that Bryant mentioned. And then I think, too, it's a time for us to ask about who else is involved. What other vendors are you working with? What other expectations do you have for other partnerships as well? It sets a really good baseline and foundation. And then we kind of sit with that. And then we can kind of go back, discuss it amongst ourselves. And then on that consultative call, to your point, Mike, we can come back and say, you know what, here's what we think. Here's our recommendations. This is more of a strategy session where we're echoing back what we heard to you so that, hey, does this go-to-market plan sound good to you? This is the rough budget that we're looking at here. This is like a more or less like a mapping out of our approach. Let's chat about it. Does it make sense? Because normally what would happen with a lot of partnerships is you'd get a big fat proposal, it'd land on your desk, you wouldn't know what to do with half of it. And this is really an opportunity for us to take a step back and say, okay, here's what we heard. Let's set everything down on the table in front of us and talk about how we're going to work with all this together and really crush our goals together. And that's the point of that consultative call.
I think one of the nice things that I've learned from working with you guys that is pretty rare in the industry, in the creative agency side, frankly, across the board, never mind in the multifamily space or real estate spaces, you do take that real strategic, goal-oriented approach to the work you're doing. And in other words, you're not just thinking about painting a pretty picture, as I like to say, for a nice logo and beautiful brand or marketing services campaigns, but you really, from what I see and understand, tailor that around specific project needs and goals. How did you, I'm just curious, two things. How did you start to sort of really lean in that direction? And then two, how can a client be working with you? Do you need more information? Do you need to see what their goals are? How do you have those conversations to make sure you're understanding what their actual goals are, what the results they're trying to achieve, such that you can build a program to help them achieve those goals?
Yeah. So kind of going back to some of those initial questions and some of that information that's very helpful. Project budget is one of those things. Understanding how much they've allocated for, marketing spend on a project is very important for us to know so that we can make sure that we're tailoring our approach to what that budget is. Sometimes people have allocated more budget than is necessary. Other times it's been less than is appropriate. And it's really our job to show our clients or, the developer why the marketing that they are spending is an investment in the project as opposed to just an expense. Because the more that they do invest from the marketing standpoint and the more robust of an approach that they put together, it is going to drive returns into the project faster and help them maximize those returns. So when it comes to budget, timelines, again, the different constraints of the project that I keep harping on, it's very important that we just understand those, because sometimes we're working on a project that's a 300 unit building that we only have 4 months to execute the brand and marketing and then jump right into lease up. And in that case, we're going to switch our process around slightly to prioritize that speed. On other projects, we get brought in super early in the process and we have a lot longer of a timeline, and we can kind of take an approach that's a little bit more methodical and slow and steady. But every project's different, both from a timeline standpoint, both from a scope standpoint, the different vendors that they're using on the project, and certainly budgets. So it's just important to have kind of the full details so that we can, again, I keep saying this, but like custom tailor the approach that we're putting together in order to, at the end of the day, accelerate their leasing velocity and maximize their returns in the project.
I'm going to put an exclamation point over the first part of that, Bryant, because I think that's really important. I don't think anyone here thinks that Authentic is the perfect fit as a creative agency partner for every project out there. That would be really great, but that's not the case. So I think though,
might be painful too, but
maybe a little bit too much work there. I think though the point there is find a partner that A, understands the project, B, can wrap their arms around what the details are of that project, and C, are going to show you value for what you're investing. And I think that's, Bryant has done a really great job leading that for Authentic. And I think it's crystal clear to me now. Maybe it wasn't before we kind of formulated that, but being able to show the potential ROI to our partners on these projects, I think takes what we're doing to a new level, because it allows the partnership to really unfold in a way where it's mutually beneficial. Obviously, we're growing, we're doing more, amazing work with them, but they understand the value in the work that we're doing and they buy into that. And I think that buy-in on the approach is such an important piece of a partnership with a creative agency, Authentic or not, being able to formalize that and having that in your back pocket from day 0 through month 12 or month 18, however long you're going to be working with that partner. Super critical.
That actually brings up another question, which is, how do you guys deal with it or approach the conversations with clients when they may come with a stack of ideas that maybe are not quite what you guys think are the best way to create a brand or go to market, in the sense that, I'm sure you don't just sit there and pound your chest and say, we've done 30, marketing campaigns this year alone. And, so, but you do have expertise and you do have a skill set and experience that, that the prospect that's talking to you is needs and looks for. But how do you approach those conversations, and how could you advise a prospective prospect to think about those types of conversations where they may have lots of ideas coming in, but you guys may not, you guys may have other ideas you want to present or other options, in the toolbox that you think are best for this particular project?
You want to take that one, Chris?
Yeah, to me, I think that is probably the case, Mike, on 9 of 10 projects. I think everyone has an idea of what they want things to be when they come in. They have preconceived notions. They have, names that they want already. They have things that they're, spouse has told them, or their friends have told them, or their investment partners have told them. And I think for us, the kickoff call is just a really great way to kind of like get all that out there. The kickoff call is probably pretty much a staple meeting for most creative agencies. I think for us, we really try to pull together all the notes that we've gathered in the discovery and consultative call, but then also just kind of hear it from the horse's mouth, right? Like, tell me what your expectations are. What have you already been thinking about? Oh, you like these 3 names? Why? Like, let's get to the bottom of that. At the end of the day, I always kind of say, like, the creatives should be left to do the creative things. And I don't think that a developer is necessarily the creative in the room. I'm not even the creative in the room anymore, as much as I love the creative process. We have really, great people on our team that can handle those decisions. And, it kind of comes back to the trust thing. It's the buy-in. It's tell us all of that stuff that's on your mind, but then let us sort of digest, let us come back to you with our recommendations and our thoughts based on what we've heard so far.
Yeah. And I'm sure, it helps if you, as you said earlier, are really kind of reflecting and coming back to what the goals of the project are. It's not necessarily to have a brand or campaign that is appealing to one person or the development team. It's what is appealing to the audience that they're targeting for this particular project. And on that note, how do you sort of think about that whether it's in kickoff or strategy sort of sessions with a client to make sure you're keeping the audience in mind and the customer who's going to be, or the prospective residents who will be targeted with living in this property?
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of a lot of different pieces of our process. Like Chris was mentioning, it's a big part of our kickoff call. We have a whole section of questions and different exercises that we would walk a client or developer through to really just understand the audience, that we're targeting. There are a lot of different factors that play into that. The specific neighborhood, the size of the project, the type of the product. Are we talking about a Class A building? Like, what are all these nuances and attributes of the project? Really inform that. And then during our brand and identity development process, we dive into that even deeper. And along the way, we're using tools like Esri to kind of better understand market dynamics and trends that are happening in different geos. And that all really informs the recommendations that we do make. And oftentimes, the developer kind of has an idea of who that is before we get started. So oftentimes it's not us necessarily bringing together these super unique and out of nowhere ideas. It's more so just kind of more substantiating where the developer maybe kind of thought that it already was, and really just adding more weight and supplemental additional ideas to really just take it to the next level.
Awesome. And in your process, what do you guys do, or do you involve, or do you recommend involving other participants in this process, like other members of the development team, whether that's the design team, architects, any other vendors or partners that might be on the project? Do you like to have others involved, or do you prefer to have a sort of a smaller circle?
Yeah, I always kind of go towards who are the decision makers at the end of the day. It's one thing to have 6 people on a call represented on the client side, but if at the end of the day, one person or 2 people are the decision makers, I don't necessarily want to invite kind of all these other opinions into the call. However, if it's important to have them on the call for one reason or another, which I think would come out in a discovery and consultative call, we always want to make sure that they feel welcome, and we can kind of hear their point of view too, because, depending on the project, it could be even the family member who has a legacy in the neighborhood or something like that, where we really need to consider, okay, this project has family roots. Let's hear from that family member, or whatever the unique case may be. At the end of the day, though, I really do think it's decision makers need to be present. Hopefully that's an obvious thing. And then being able to take that insight forward so that in each subsequent phase of a project as it unfolds, they can be on board, they can give the thumbs up, and we can continue to move forward.
Awesome. Yeah. So listen, I've loved asking you guys. This is going to help me a lot when I talk to you guys in the future about working on a new project. So I think now I have all my notes written down here. But what else? What else did I not ask you guys that can really help if anything, if that can help a client really get out of the gate working well with you guys from the start?
Yeah, I think one interesting question to ask out loud would be like, maybe what's the number one or two things that we would suggest or recommend that these owners, developers, operators are looking out for in their creative agency partners? I think Bryant and I might have a slightly different answer to that. Not to put you on the spot, Bryant, but what would you say to that? Like, what should people be looking out for?
For their creative agency partner, what should they be looking out for when they reach out?
Yep.
Yeah. I guess I would want to know just the dynamics of the different people that are on their team. These properties nowadays, when we're talking about marketing, we're talking about brand design, we're talking about web design, we're talking about web development, we're talking about, integrating with leasing software, email remarketing. There's just so many facets that that you have to be an expert in order to lease up these projects successfully. So I guess just understanding the team, understanding where all of these different capabilities are coming from, so that you're getting it from someone who has, gone through that process before and who has those capabilities in-house and can take them over the finish line. There's a lot of different ways that these projects can come together. And I think any good agency will be able to kind of see the forest through the trees and be able to connect the dots between all of those different aspects of a good marketing campaign and really deliver something that's comprehensive, and that can get the job done.
That's a great point. I didn't even think to go there, but that's a really great point with how complicated the industry is these days. I would add that feeling comfortable and confident with your partner in that they know what they're talking about. We pivoted into the real estate industry 5 or 6 years ago now, and I think it hasn't been very long, to be honest, that I felt like pretty confident in understanding and having a grasp of the entire industry and how it works. And I think one of the things that we see most commonly get kicked back to us is, or I should say, are groups that go with a non-specialized creative agency who they do it all, but then they lose that forest through the trees concept. They kind of get lost in what they're doing. They lose focus, and suddenly the developer is left with something that they can't really use, or maybe they've stopped halfway through because they kind of lost focus on what the goals are. I think being able to vet out a creative partner and show and see that they have a track record is really critical to a great partnership.
I would agree with that, and I would echo that, because I've seen it. I've seen it from the other side as well, where there's a really talented, solid, strong agency, but just not a lot of multifamily industry knowledge or expertise, and it becomes really challenging. There's a lot of unique things about the multifamily real estate industry that are extraordinarily helpful in developing creative branding or even marketing campaigns that matter a lot, right? And it matters a lot. And so that expertise, that experience is hugely important. And, especially if you can find someone that brings the huge talent of a high level studio agency, but also has that multifamily expertise. That's a rare beast indeed. Not to toot you guys up too much, but it's a rare mix for sure.
Well, Bryant and Mike, this was super fun. Bryant, you passed the test. You're welcome back anytime.
Sweet.
Thanks for coming on today.
Wait a minute. Wait, Chris, I didn't get to vet that first. What's going on here? You gotta say, hey,
that's true.
We have to have a vote on this.
I have one vote for Bryant can come back. He did a great job.
Thank you.
I'm kidding, Bryant. That was awesome to chat with you here, and welcome to Real Wins. Hopefully again.
Yeah, let's do it again.